Hello everyone, am I audible? Okay, so everyone, can you please use the live instructor interaction channel? And people who are using the Zoom channel, I'll request all of them to come on Discord and use the live instructor interaction channel. I won't be monitoring the Zoom chat, so I won't be able to answer your question there. So we'll start in a minute, but before that, I do have a couple of questions for all of you. So for how many of you, this is the first Pentester Academy bootcamp? Okay, so we have a lot of people whose first boot camp this is. And from where did you hear about this boot camp? Okay, that's great. And how many of you are familiar with or have performed web application pen testing? And how many of you are web developers or are familiar with how web applications work? Okay, that's great. So it's not required to have the knowledge of web development. We'll start with the very basics. So now we'll start with the session. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Web Application Security Beginner Edition Bootcamp. So first of all, thank you. We have people from all around the globe. And for some of you, it might be early in the morning. And for some of you, it will be late in the night. So thanks. And a quick introduction about me. My name is Jasmine. I'll be the instructor for this bootcamp. And I'm currently working as a security researcher at Pentester Academy. I have a bachelor's degree from IIIT Bhubaneswar. My work has been published in various conferences, and some of them are Black Hat USA, Asia, Arsenal, DEF CON USA, China, Demo Labs, and I've also given research talk at DEF CON China and RootCon Philippines. Apart from this, I was a co-trainer in Pentester Academy trainings at Black Hat Asia, HITB Amsterdam, HITB GSEC Singapore, New Zealand OWASP, and RootCon 13 Philippines. Now, these were the conferences where either my work has been published or I have been part of a training. So these are all the popular conference logos. And now, regarding the course, what to expect from this course. So this is going to be a very beginner-friendly introduction to web application security. We'll be covering OWASP top 10, and we'll take a look at how to exploit various misconfiguration vulnerability manually, as well as how to use popular open source tools to perform the exploitation. Now, in the prerequisite, we do not expect you to have the knowledge of web application, how they work, and web application pen testing. We'll start with the very basics, but it is important to know fundamentals such as networking and knowledge of using Linux. We will be using Linux, and we'll be using various Linux utilities and tools. All of them are based on Linux, so that's why it is important. Now, it's important to know what this course is not. So this is not a basics or web application basics course where we'll teach how to create application. And this is not an exhaustive coverage of web application security because there are thousands of vulnerabilities. And this is not an advanced treatment of OWASP top 10. By this, we mean that OWASP top 10, again, these top 10 categories include huge number of vulnerabilities. And some of these are very, very complex to orchestrate and are very difficult to exploit. So we'll take a look at the most popular ones. And there is going to be a web application security advanced edition. So stay tuned for that bootcamp as well. Now, the training methodology. So this class is not going to be a one-way lecture. This is going to be more like a discussion. So please feel free to post questions and I'll answer them. And in class, I'll request you to focus on the concept, focus on the techniques, and ask as many questions as you can. Please do not try to solve the lab at the same time with me. This is because, again, you might miss out on some of the concept and you might not be able to follow along in the next part of the session. During the week, we expect all of you to solve the labs which we are going to cover in the bootcamp, and we'll also be providing you home labs, which again, you have to solve them. And during the week, you can go ahead, ask questions, and let's help each other out. So all of the labs are again on our attack defense platform. So with this bootcamp, you are provided with a 5-week subscription to Pentester Academy as well as attack defense platform. So you would have received a email similar to this with the activation code in here. And I hope all of you have received that email. If not, you can drop a message to me, and after the session, I'll provide you access to the platform. Okay, that's great. So before the course syllabus discussion, let me tell you this, that this session is recorded. So we'll be providing the session recording as well as all of the lab and the course material to you after the session. Now let's take a look at the course syllabus. So we'll start with the basics of web application and protocol basics. And then these are again web application concepts. And we are going to take a look at reconnaissance. And this is the important part. We'll take a look at how to use various popular open source tools. Now, it's important to note that we won't be following the exact structure. This is because, for example, some of the tools such as XSR, right? This requires the knowledge of XSS, which will, again, this vulnerability will take a look at later on in the session. So we won't be going in the exact order. We'll pick all of these tools up while we are building the foundation, and then we'll slowly build the foundation, and later on in the session we'll go ahead, take a look at advanced and uh, difficult misconfiguration and vulnerabilities. So now OWASP top 10, this is again a documentation which represents the critical vulnerabilities starting from A1, A2. As we can notice, these are ranked based on the severity. So we won't be going, or we won't be following the same order. We'll pick up the one which are easier to understand, and we'll cover those first. And then later on in the session, we'll take a look at the advanced ones or the most difficult ones. And then we'll also provide you real world attack case studies. So this is something you'll take a look at later on in the session, and you will realize that how simple misconfiguration and simple mistakes can lead to compromise of lot of applications. So now after the bootcamp, there is going to be a certification exam. So the certification exam is going to be a 48-hour exam, and this can be attempted within 60 days after the bootcamp. Now this is going to be an open book exam, and you'll be provided with access code to another platform where you'll have to put in the access code, and you'll have to solve 4 out of 5 challenges. Now, in these challenges, there will be one or more than one flag. You'll have to get all of the flags, submit them, and once you have solved 4 out of 5 challenges, you will be able to claim the certificate. There is no requirement of submitting any reports. So now we'll start with the web application security. So I'll go off camera so there is no distraction. And now every day we interact with web application, whether it is, so this is to answer the question of how do we prepare for the certification. So we hope that again, as long as you solve all of the labs which we are covering in the class, as well as the home labs which we have provided, that will be sufficient for you to complete or gain the certificate. Uh, so this is to answer the question of, again, NetLocker. If there are no reports, what is PA doing to curb cheating, etc.? This is a big issue for some other training establishments. So currently, again, we expect honesty from all of you. So there is no method for us to verify if you have cheated during the exam, but we hope that, again, all of you are again honest and you won't cheat on the exam. So any other questions? So next we'll start with web application security. And now we interact with web applications every day, whether it is, again, a banking site or ordering something online, education website, and we use social media, right? Instagram, Facebook, and every day, I'm hoping all of you might be watching movies and series on Netflix, right? So all of these are web application. Now, if one of these web application have a vulnerability, it creates a big problem, right? Because someone can attack you from that web application. They can steal the data which you have stored on the browser, such as credit card details or your address information, all of those. So how many of you have pen tested web app or mobile application? And can anyone tell me how mobile applications are connected to web applications? Anyone? Yes, that is correct. So mobile application uses APIs. Now these APIs are based on web application or web service based backends. So that's why some of the web application pen testing, again, it will be very much significant to understand how to perform web application pen testing. And some of the process will overlap in case of mobile app pen testing as well. Now, if we'll take a look at the web application vulnerability severity over the years, we'll notice that this trend is not, again, it is not reducing, right? We have severe or we have a large number of vulnerabilities. This is not reducing to a great portion. And can anyone tell me why is this happening? Because technology is advancing, right? So with advancement of technology, things should become more and more secure, but that's not the case. Yes, that is correct. So what happens is many times many of the developers are not familiar or do not have or have not covered secure programming while they were going through again the coding course or while they were learning how to code this application. And by the time they realize that okay, this is a vulnerability, it's too late, right? So we hope that as long as secure programming is not included on again the college and school level where you're learning how to code, there will be vulnerabilities, and this trend is not going to change for at least another 5 or 10 years at least. So now if we take a look at the most common vulnerabilities, we'll notice that we have A6 security misconfiguration. So how many of you have found default passwords? Either this could be on your router or again on a cafeteria router, college, universities, whatnot, right? So this is again, this kind of mistakes happens a lot. We'll notice that people are using default credentials, easy to guess credentials, and this itself creates a security misconfiguration. And we'll notice that 84% of the misconfiguration or vulnerabilities are due to security misconfiguration. So in this session, what we are, or in the upcoming sessions, we are going to take a look at attacks on traditional architecture, as well as we are going to take a look at attacks on cloud native applications. So this way, again, you can build the contrast between both of these. And again, let's go to the next slide. And if you'll notice who all is affected, we'll notice that pretty much everyone is affected. We have financial institution, IT, manufacturing, telecom, government, right? And in case of government, what happens is once a vulnerability is identified, it takes relatively longer for them to mitigate and patch this misconfiguration just because there is a process, right? So due to which traditional uh, procedures or traditional exploitation techniques still work on these web applications. So most of the government might be using traditional architecture. They might not have migrated to cloud native application, right? So that's why we are going to touch upon traditional as well as cloud native applications. So when we are talking about web applications, right, so there are three major components in here. One is the user, then we have the browser, and then this entire part is the backend, right? So what happens is when we send a request, so for example, if you're searching something on Google, right? So whenever you are sending a request, it is sent to a server, and then that server again queries what all data is being sent and checks if something is to be done with the database, and then returns a response. So that's when we get the entire page. Now, this is the traditional architecture. We have a user, we have an internet, then we have a classic load balancer, and these are the traditional server, right? So when we send out a request, it is handled by these servers, and then it interacts with the database servers, returns a response. Now, at this point, whenever we are building out or whenever we are using a data center or we have created a data center, we have to make sure these servers are physically secure, right? So this has to be physically secure. This has to be secure on the software level, which is again, and these have to be secure on operating system level. And then the developer's code has to be secure as well. So now when we are talking about, again, request response, right? So now the question arises, what comes to the browser? What happens when we send out a request? How is the browser rendering everything? So there are three major components. We have HTML, we have CSS, we have JavaScript. So we send a request, we get these three in response. Now, this is how the response is rendered. So once we get all of the response, the HTML parser will parse the HTML to create something called DOM. And DOM stands for Document Object Model. We'll take a look at what exactly this is in just a minute. Now, the CSS is used to update the DOM. This is again, the beautification happens with the help of CSS. And then the JavaScript is used to change the DOM, which is again, DOM basically is a graph of various elements. So for example, we have a title, right? So this could be title, and then we have a heading, and then we have a paragraph, right? So similarly, we have another heading. So all of this information, all of this layout is stored in DOM. So DOM is Document Object Model, and it's a World Wide Web Consortium standard. So here we can notice we have the initial document, and then we have the root element, and all of the elements reside in this one. Now, the beauty about JavaScript is it can go ahead, modify these HTML elements. It can change the property. So for example, let's say you select a checkbox, right? Based on that, so for example, if you have a checkbox, you selected it, based on that, it can enable certain options or it can disable certain options. So this is all possible with the help of JavaScript. We can change the HTML attribute. For example, we can make this division or element as invisible. We can increase the font size. All of this is possible. And we can also perform CSS styling, and we can trigger HTML events as well. Now, how many of you are aware of the concept of AJAX? Anyone? And I hope everyone has, again, Pentester Academy itself requires a Google account, right? So when you are creating a Google account for the first time, right, you have to provide a username. So when we are entering that username, we'll notice that we immediately get a response saying that, okay, is this username is valid, or this is not valid, or this is again already used, so please use a different one. So at that point, we do not have to submit the form, right? We have a form submission button in here, and we do not have to submit the form to know if this username field was already used or not. So behind the scenes, what is happening is it is sending a request, which is something called an AJAX request. So at this point, what happens is initial page is loaded. So initial page request, we get the final page, and then this page will send out request to the server, and there is no requirement of any sort of reload on the page. So this happens seamlessly, and we do not have to perform any reload. Now imagine if you have to fill a form, and in order to check whether this is valid, you have to click a button every time, right? So it becomes very painful. So this problem was mitigated with the help of AJAX. Now, in case of web application, the attacks can happen at 3 points. So we have the first part, which is again this part. This is the client, this is the server or the backend, and then the transport protocol. So we are going to take a look at attacks on this part and this part, which is again what all attacks we can perform on the backend servers and what all attacks we can perform on the browser, which is basically XSS and all of the client-side based attacks. So now when we are talking about HTTP protocol, it is a client-server architecture, and it is a request response model, right? We have to send a request, we get a response. And resources are identified by URLs. There are various method or various versions of HTTP. We have 1.0, 1.1, 2.0, 3.0. So the later version are again provide feature or have improved quality of service and allows piggybacking in connection. So for example, two requests or multiple requests are rendered through one single connection, and all of those improvements are done in the later versions. Now, the important thing to notice, HTTP is stateless. So how many of you have watched the movie Memento? Anyone? So in case of Memento, he has a short-term memory, right, or disorder. So in that case, what happened was every time he woke up or every morning, he would not remember what had happened previously. So HTTP is similar. It's just that it has a long-term memory loss. So every request is treated independently. So each request does not have any knowledge of what had happened previously. So that's why we use something called cookie, which tells the server to, again, maintain a state, and it is used to maintain state on both the ends. So now in this case, every request needs to be separately authenticated, and every request must carry authentication information. So this is majorly done with the help of cookie. Now this is the HTTP request. So we have the format in here. We have the HTTP method, we have the path, we have the version of the protocol, and these are the headers. We'll take a look at HTTP request and response in just a minute. Now there are something called HTTP request methods, right? So for example, if you'll search something on Google, let's say we search for hello. Now at this point, we are sending a request and we need to get some information from the server, right? So that's why we are sending a GET request. So this is GET request, and the parameters are passed in URL. So if you notice the parameters, we have Q is equal to hello, right? So this is the string which we have entered that appears in here. So all of these parameters, when we are fetching some data from the server, we send a GET request and we pass all of these parameters in the URL. Now, in case of post, or post methods are primarily used for form submission. So for example, when you are signing up on Google, and when you fill all of those information and click on the submit button, it is actually sending a post request. And the data, everything is inside the message body. It is not present in the, again, the parameters in here. Now, please note, this is the recommended practice. Developers sometimes do not follow the recommended practice. They can go ahead, use it, or use all of these methods in different way. Now, the options method, it tells us what all methods are supported by the URL. Now, this is again application as well as server dependent configuration. Not all servers and not all application will support this method. So only the application which supports this method, it will return us what all methods are supported for a URL. Otherwise, it will return us a method not allowed error. And head is similar to the GET request, except there is no message body, right? So at this point, we can notice we are getting the whole content, right? So when we send a head request, it will only return us the header without any sort of message body. Trace, this is used for diagnostic purposes, and we won't find this anymore. If you're able to find this, this is again a very rare case, and the server might be vulnerable, because again, if this method is enabled, then that means developer might have made some other mistakes. So this is very rare to find. Now put is again to perform put operation to update objects, and similarly we have delete to delete a resource. And these two are again very critical methods. If you are not or pen testing an API, if you have found these methods on an actual web application, that means we can perform various kind of attack using or by leveraging these methods. So next we have HTTP response, right? When we send a request, we have to send it in a specific format, and when we send when we get a response, it has to be in a specified format. So this is the format. We have the HTTP protocol version first of all, and then we have the status code, and this is the status message. And then we have the headers. So we'll take a look at HTTP request and response in just a minute. So now, can anyone tell me what is the most interesting HTTP response status code? So these are the HTTP status code. This indicates what kind of response we have gotten, right? So most of the time you will see level 100 for WebSockets. For a normal web application, you will see level 200, 200 OK created, no content. And this is again for redirection. This is something we'll see very often as well. And then we have 400. This is the one which we need to look out for, 401 unauthorized. 403 forbidden, and this is very important, 500. So any kind of 500 based error, we have to again diagnose this, or we have, as an attacker, we have to inspect more, because whenever we get a 500 level error, that means something has gone wrong on the server end, and this could be because of something you did. For example, if you are, or if you have provided a malicious input in the form field and it returned a 500 error, that means the developer has not handled that case, and it might provide us with an opportunity to go ahead exploit it further. So now let's jump into a lab. So I'm going to uh, let me go to the next slide. Yeah. So now, in order to understand HTTP codes, you can also go to, just a second, http.cat. So this is again, the developers have used cats to indicate various kinds of HTTP status codes. So as we can notice, if I scroll down in here, the site is still loading, I think. This is again for, let me reload this again. As we can notice, we have 500 internal error. Similarly, network connect timeout error. So all of these are cat images they have used to demonstrate what kind of error it is. So again, you can refer to this one in case if you have any doubts with the status codes. Just a second. Let me quickly log on to attack defense. Now, this is again, all of the URLs will be mentioned on the slide. So please don't worry, we'll be providing the slide after the session. So once you get to the page, again, it is very easy to get lost on attack defense because we have over 2000 labs. So you can go ahead easily click the lab links from here and then start the lab. So once you get to this page, you have to select the nearest server. So in this case, currently I'm in India, so I'll select India and I'll be clicking on run. Now it will take around 30 to 40 seconds for the lab to be prepared. Now please note, we offer infinite lab time, but there's a restriction that you can only run one lab at a time. So for example, if you have started one lab and then you go ahead, try to start another lab, it will show you that maximum concurrency limit has been hit. So in that case, you'll have to stop the lab. Now the lab can be stopped from either the same dashboard. So if we'll wait for a few more seconds, we'll notice there's a lab link and stop option. And the labs can also be stored from the, as we can notice, we have lab link and lab stop option. And the ongoing labs, the labs can be stopped from this specific section as well. Click on ongoing labs and go ahead, click on the stop button. So this will also terminate the lab. So please note, this is a common error which many people encounter. So now next I'm going to go to the lab link. And in this case, we have provided you full-blown Kali machine. So you do not need to, again, use your own Kali machine. The Kali machine is provided to you. Now this is an expected error. So you can go ahead, click on OK, OK. The error will prompt twice. Now we have a very simple application. This is a BWOP application. This is a deliberate vulnerable application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reload the web page. And now we can notice we have received a lot of packets. So how many of you have used Wireshark before or T-Shark before? Anyone? Okay, that's great. So let me quickly increase the font size. Just a second. Yeah, it is sufficiently large enough. So let me quickly restart the capture. Now let's say we have a web page in here, right? So I'm going to reload this again. Okay, so is there an issue? Just a second, let me quickly change the network so that there is no such issue. Now, please let me know if there is another issue. I'll yeah, switch the network now. So hopefully it should not, the error should not take place now. So now when we are sending a request, so whenever we are again uh, sending out a request, we'll notice that we send a get request, right? So by default, whenever we are entering a URL, so is it still happening? Okay, I'm not sure whether it is issue with the network or whether it is an issue with Zoom. Okay, so it might be an issue with Zoom. I'm not sure because I have not encountered this issue before. So now here we can notice we have a get request, right? And now the traffic is originating from source, which is again, this is the source, which is our IP address. So in the labs, all of the attacker machine will end with the IP address .2, and all of the target machine will have IP address of .3. So this is again the next IP address in the range. So for example, if there are multiple target machines, it will be .4, .5, and so on. So in this case, what we have is we are taking a look at the packet which is sent from the attacker or our machine to the target machine. And at this point, we have sent a GET request. So if we'll expand in here, so as we can notice, this is the packet headers, and then we have the entire packet dissection in here, which shows details in ASCII as well as hex format. So if we'll expand this one, .2 is the attacker, which is again our machine in this case. So if we'll expand this one, these are the headers which are there, right? So we have get HTTP version information, then we have host information. So can anyone tell me what is the most important information passed in here? Anyone? Yes, that is correct. So cookie is something as an attacker we can play with. And then we have a couple of other header fields. We have upgrade in secure request. This is to make sure we upgrade the request from HTTP to HTTPS if it is possible. Now, if we'll take a look at the response, so this was the request, right? Now, if we'll take a look at the response, this was the response, 200 OK. And this response was provided from, again, the source was .3, which is the target machine, and to .2, which is the attacker machine. Now, in the source, we'll notice that, let me scroll in here. This is again the status, and this is the status message. And if we scroll down in here, we'll notice that here we have the line-based text data. So if we'll expand this, and this is the entire HTML content. So this is passed in here, right? So this is the entire HTML content, and it is sent in form of packet. Now we can go ahead, right click on this one, follow the TCP and HTTP stream to get the entire information. So here we can notice this is the GET request which was initiated, and it appears in red because it was initiated from the attacker machine, and the blue one is the response which we got. So all of the CSS file, if we'll take a look at this one, right? So this is again, now the HTML page. So for example, let me go back in here. When this page loads for the first time, it sends requests to load other resources. So this includes the CSS JavaScript files, right? So all of them will have separate GET requests. So here we can notice we have stylesheet/stylesheet.css, and there we go. So all of these requests are sent in, again, 200 OK. Similarly, we'll notice that all of these requests are sent in different one. So now Wireshark offers a beautiful feature of, again, applying filters. So for example, let me quickly log in with the credentials. So I'm going to mention P and bug in here. So this is again valid set of credentials. So I'm going to click on login. And now we have sent or we have provided the application with credentials, right? So this will probably be sent in post method. So what we are going to do is we are going to apply a filter called http.request, and we are going to mention method as post. And there we go. So what we are doing at this point is we are taking a look at the packet which contains all of the credential information. So we look for post request, and if we'll expand this one, if we'll scroll down in here, here we have HTML form URL encoded, right? So this is again all of the information we sent in the form. So we have login information, we have the login is again corresponding to the username. So we have B as the username and then password as bug. So now, as you can notice, anyone who has a network level access, for example, when you're using public Wi-Fi, and if you're using any sort of HTTP based application, the credentials and everything, all of the data is sent in plain text. So anyone can pretty much view that, right? So that's why it is recommended to not to visit any kind of HTTP website whenever you're using a public Wi-Fi. And in general, we avoid visiting HTTP website altogether because again, it's very, very insecure. So this is again how to apply filter and how we can go ahead get the form data information from the packet. Now it is not required to use Wireshark all the time. This is used primarily for debugging purposes. When you think like something was supposed to work, for example, when you're using a tool and it is not returning proper results, so that's where you can go and use Wireshark to identify whether it is an issue on your system or whether it is issue on the application or the server end itself. So this is again the HTTP request get parameters are sent in the URL. Post is primarily used for form submissions. And now we are going to take a look at another lab. So let me quickly bring up a video. So in this course or in this bootcamp, we are going to refer to demo videos as well as live demos. This is just to make sure that we do not waste time on typos and all of these issues. So let me quickly bring up a video. So how many of you have used a tool called Derby? Anyone? So again, this is the first thing. Select the nearest region, start up the lab. And now what we have to do is, first of all, identify our own IP address. So first of all, what we have to do is identify our own IP address. So this is again the IP address of the attacker ending with .2. Now please note this is again the eth1 interface. It will always be in the format 192.x.y.2, right? So these two numbers are going to change. The rest of the ones will be the same. Now once we have identified the .2 IP range or .2 IP address, .3 is where we have the target application. So now, first of all, whenever we find the application, the first thing is to enumerate the application or perform the basic set of operation on the application to explore the entire functionality. So this application has a simple login form, and please make note of the endpoint. We have login.php, right? So this is the first giveaway. So this application uses PHP as the backend. Now, next what we are going to do is we are going to take a look at page source of the application. And here we can notice the endpoint where the form data is sent is login.php, which is basically the same page, right? So whenever we are submitting a form, it will send the data to the same page. These are the name of the fields. We have name as name and we have name as password. So these are again the form fields which are sent to the same page. And the method is post. So this is again, all of this information is crucial. So what we are going to do is we are going to try actual credential, which is again John password is the valid credential. And here we can notice the interface changes to welcome John. Placeholder is used, for example, let's say we have a form field. So let's say we have a form in here, right? So placeholder is just to tell that this is the kind of data. So for example, if you have a phone number field, so placeholder will contain +91 and then the 9 digit. So as soon as this provides that or tells the user that you have to enter a number in here, so they will use that specific format. So now at this point, what we have done is we have explored the application and we have performed login onto the application. And we are going to take a look at the post. Before that, what we are going to do is we are going to use the tool called Derby. So Derby is again for directory enumeration. So what we are doing is we are simply using or specifying Derby followed by the path or the web application URL. So here we can notice, let me go back in here. So here we can notice we have specified the Derby followed by the URL. And now Derby automatically starts the scan. So it uses a default word list. And this is where the word list is located. We have user shared Derby word list common.txt. So by default Derby uses, so let me quickly go in here, just a minute. So if we'll go to the lab, this is the Kali attacker machine, right? So all of these word lists are actually available in the ls-l/user share word list directory. So here we can notice we have multiple word list, and the Derby one is this one. So by default, it uses a common.txt word list. Now, please note, based on the word list you use, it can take a lot of time, right? So you have to select the common or the smaller one, and you can go ahead, run the Derby scan parallelly as well. So in this case, what we have done is we have used the default word list, and now Derby is able to identify a couple of interesting directories. So can anyone tell me what are the interesting directories in all of these? Anyone? Yes, that is correct. So some of you have gotten it right. We have two interesting directory. We have uploads and we have mail, right? Now uploads, as the name suggests, there might be a file upload feature, which again uploads all of these files onto this specific directory, right? So that's what makes it more interesting. For an attacker, if you can upload a script, maybe PHP script, can you go ahead, get a remote code execution on the server, right? So these are again a couple of other directory. We have CSS, image. All of these are static content, right? All of these contain CSS file, image files, JavaScript files. So these might not reveal or might not contain any crucial sensitive information. Vendor. So this is again many times when you're building out application, there will be vendor specific JavaScript, CSS as well. So all of those of bundled JavaScript, CSS, all of those are usually kept in the vendor directory. So these are the custom CSS which is written by developers, and this is for third-party vendor CSS and JavaScript. So this is the interesting directory. We have uploads directory. So next, what we are going to do is, just a second. For some odd reason, I think my entire system is slowing down. So how many of you have used curl to send out a request? I hope everyone would have used curl once. And how many of you have not used curl? Okay, so for individuals who have not used curl, curl is basically a utility to send out HTTP request. So we can go ahead, mention the method, and we can mention the URL. So it will clear up in just a minute. So this is again how to send a GET request. So let me go back in here. So we are using, or we are calling curl -x is to tell what kind of method is to be used. So this is again get, and then we are sending a request to the .3, which is again the server IP address. And now by default, whenever we do not specify a port, it uses H80 port, right? So this is actually sending traffic to port 80. Now, if we mention HTTPS in front, HTTPS:// then the IP address, it will send the traffic to port 443. Yes, that is correct. Curl is like a command line web browser. So now we notice that, okay, this is the response which we got when we were sending a GET request. Now, next, what we are going to do is we are going to send an options request. Now, we did not get any response, right? So can anyone tell me why we did not get any response? Anyone? Why we did not get any response in case of curl options request? So the reason we did not get any response is because there was no HTML body. So basically it was empty response, we can say. It is supported, but since there was no HTML body, it did not show us any message in here, right? So this was again, there was no output because there is no HTML body. So now what we are going to do is we are going to use the verbose option, which is again -v. Now, when we sent a verbose or when we enabled verbose option, here we can notice that these are the header information, right? So whenever we are sending a curl request, by default, it does not show us the header information. And now header information, we mean the request header as well as the response header. So this is again, all of this, as you can notice, this is the request header, right? And this is the response. So all of these are response header. So now, can anyone point out the important things which are, again, represented by the response? One is this one. This is correct. Allow. Yes. The other information is this one, right? So many developers and administrator tend to remove this header or, again, disable this header. Now, this reveals that the version of PHP is 5.5.9. And this also reveals the operating system as Ubuntu. Now, this is very crucial information when we are performing pen testing. Now, one of the important thing to note here is the methods which are allowed. We have get, head, and option. Set cookie is also important. We'll take a look at what all attacks we can perform on cookie later on in the third session. So next, what we are going to do is we are going to send a head request. So now please note, this is very similar to -x. Just a second. This is very similar to -x head. So -i is basically sending a head request. So that's why we do not need to mention -x head. Now, in case of head request, there is no HTML body, right? It only returns us the header. So these are the header information. We get 200 OK, the cookie, and we get the X powered by header, and we get the content type. So that's all information we get when we are sending a head request. Next, what we are going to do is we are going to send a post request. Yeah, I can make it full screen, but it won't be possible to zoom it further. So I hope this is visible now. Sometimes there's issue with full screen. That's why I avoid using full screen on Zoom. Okay, so now what we are going to do is let me go back in here. So here, what we did was we sent a post request, right? So let me go in here. We sent a post request. We sent a post request and it says 405 method not allowed. So this is a very common error which you'll get in reality when you're sending out options request. Not all web application and web server support options request. So this is a very common message which you'll see, method not allowed. So this was again expected because options revealed that only get, head, and options were allowed. This is not a client side error. This is a server side error, right? So whenever okay, I think it will change the entire setting, right? So I'll have to So is anyone still facing issue with the font size in this case? Okay. Okay. So thanks, Broken Disk. So in case if someone is facing an issue, they can increase the font or zoom in Zoom itself. So next what we are doing is, we know that there is a presence of login.php endpoint, right? So now what we are doing is we are sending a options request to this endpoint, and here we'll notice that these are the methods which are supported. We have get, post, head, and options. Yes, it is possible. So now this is to answer the question of NetLocker. Is there any time that a method could be allowed but not advertised in options? Yes, because options request, the response which is returned for this specific request can be controlled by the developer. So they can easily mention that these are the options or these are the methods which are allowed, but they can also allow other method. So this is basically a simple header based response, right? So the developers can control it. So next what we are doing is we are going to send a GET request, and we receive the normal response. Now the important thing to notice here is we get a 200 OK response. So this is to answer the question of Dark Unicorn. Login page are usually 403, right? Any ways to get to it? So we'll take a look at how to deal with 401 based one. 403 is actually forbidden. So this is again a different kind of restriction which is applied. We'll take a look at how to perform attack on 401. So most of the time what happens is, in case of login page, right? So if you have entered any sort of wrong credential, it will still return you 200 OK response, and then it will provide us with the message that the credentials were incorrect. So in reality, login page, all of these will either return 200 OK or 301, 302 based error messages. So now the important thing to note here is when we sent a GET request, it returned us 200 OK response. So next what we are going to do is we are going to send a POST request, and it will return a similar response. Now we know that we can provide it with the login credentials. So this is how we pass the form field values. So we know that the parameter name was name, and this was the value. And let me go back in here. So this is again the request which we just sent. Name is equal to John and password is equal to password123. So this is not the correct set of credentials, right? So at this point, what happens is the application returns 200 OK response. Now what we are going to do is we are going to send the correct request, which is again correct password in here, and let's see how the application behaves. Now the application behaved in a different manner. It returned us with 302 found error, right? So this is again for redirection. So as we can notice, on the login.php page, we provided the incorrect credential, and it provided us with a 200 OK response, right? And upon providing correct set of credentials, it provided us with 302, which is again redirection. And here we can notice it is redirecting us to index.php page. Now it is setting the cookie name is equal to John, and that's it, right? And it's also setting the cookie PHP session ID. So this is again what happened was when the login was successful, it tells or it sets the cookie as well as this cookie as well, and then it redirects us to the index.php page. So this is again the crucial point to note here is the difference in the response status code, which is again 302, and previously we were getting 200 OK for incorrect set of credentials. Now next we are going to check for post.php. This is again an endpoint which existed on the web application, and here we can notice we have get, post, headed options. So now we can go ahead, send post request to the endpoint to see how the application behaves. So this is one another method, right? So there is no need to mention space in between of these two parameter or the uh, minus x as well as the value which we pass in here. So here we can notice it says method not allowed. This is because again, this is the main endpoint itself. And on post.php, it worked fine. Now we know that there was presence of a directory called uploads, right? So the next thing is check the options enabled on the uploads directory. By default, it does not return any response or HTML body. That's why we got an empty body. And so we take a look at the headers which are passed in here. And here we can notice we have a lot of allowed method, right? So can anyone tell me what exactly is this? Anyone? So have any one of you used the web DAV feature? So let me draw in here. So this is again DAV, which represents that web DAV distributed authoring and versioning is enabled on the server. So this is again a feature which is used to manage files on the server, right? And this indicates that all of these methods are enabled. And we'll see a couple of methods which we have not seen before, right? So these are the custom methods which are again implemented by DAV. And what this provides us is this enables put method, or we can go ahead upload a file onto this specific directory. So if we'll read about, let me quickly exit the full screen. And if we'll search for WebDAV, so this is web based distributed authoring and versioning. So let me go to the Wikipedia page. So this is again, whenever you find a header, you can go ahead search for that specific header onto the Google and you'll find relevant resources. So here, this is again methods which are implemented. And let me see if I can find the put method. So basically, if you'll go through this, it will tell us that we can go ahead manage files on the server, right? So create, change, move documents on the server. Now, next what we're going to do is, let me go back to the video. So this facilitates the presence of DAV. This facilitates put method, right? So all of this option ultimately provides us what put method can do. And using put method, we can upload file. So first of all, what we are going to do is we are going to send a simple put request and see how the endpoint behaves. So as we can notice, options, as we can notice, put as well as delete method are not allowed on the main endpoint, right? So this is again, whenever we do not mention any sort of path in here, the default path is /. So this indicates the root path, and many servers are configured to send all the traffic to index.php. So in case of PHP Apache servers, we'll notice that all of the traffic which is sent to this specific endpoint is redirected to index.php. So this is again the file which is processing the request. And here we can notice this HTTP method was not allowed on the root, right? So it was not allowed on web root. That's why we got an error. Now what we are going to do next is we are going to send a put request to the uploads directory. And here we can notice it provided us with a different response. It did not throw an error. It did not say 405 method not allowed. It provided us with a different response. So what we are going to do next is we are going to create a very simple file and have a hello world string in it. So this is again hello world or hello.txt file. And next we are going to upload this file to the uploads directory. And we are going to use the option --upload -file and provide the file name. Now this behind the scenes is actually using put method to upload the file, right? So this option is automatically using put method to upload the file. Now, if we'll go to the uploads directory, we'll notice that there is a file available in here. So can anyone tell me there is one more misconfiguration? Put method is enabled. That is the first misconfiguration. There is another misconfiguration. What is that misconfiguration? Anyone? So this is to answer the question of netlocker. Are HTTP methods set at the root or can they vary by asset? So we can configure HTTP methods again on any path, any file. It is possible to do that. So now one of the biggest misconfiguration is directory listing is enabled. Now on web server, this should not be enabled unless there is some requirement. But most of the time, this should not be enabled because this will provide us or the hackers with sensitive file name information, which they can go ahead fetch. So at this point, we can notice a hello.txt file was uploaded successfully. So can anyone tell me how can we misuse this misconfiguration? Anyone? How can we abuse this misconfiguration? The put method as well as directory listing. Yes, that is correct. So next we are going to take a look at how to perform an attack on this. So let me bring up another video. So first of all, what we are going to do is we are going to write out a very simple PHP script. So this is again the IP address. Now we are going to write out the very simple PHP web shell. So this is again the starting of the PHP tag. Then what we are doing is we are going to execute whatever data we get in the command parameter. So this again, let me explain this real quick. So we are getting the CMD parameter from the GET request. So this is again, get all of the parameters from the GET request and check if CMD is present. And then we are going to execute that command with shell exec. So this basically executes the command in the sh shell. So whatever input we pass will be executed in the sh shell. Now this is again, once we get the output, we are going to echo it back. Pre is just a HTML tag for prettifying and yet beautifying the input or output. So here, what we are going to do next is save the file, and now we have a very simple shell.php script. Yes, so please don't worry. The session recording, the slides, the lab videos, everything will be provided to you after the session. So now we have a very simple PHP web shell. So this basically gets the CMD parameter from the GET request, executes that in the shell environment, and returns whatever output is returned by the shell to the user. So now what we are going to do next is, let me forward this a little. So next we are going to upload this specific file onto the uploads directory. Now we have successfully uploaded the file. So we are going to navigate to the application. And there we go. As we can see, we have shell.php uploaded in here. Now, can anyone tell me what happened at this point? Why is it appearing blank? Is the shell script executing, or is the PHP script executing? Yes, that is correct. The PHP script is executing, but behind the scenes, it is throwing an error, and that error is not returned as back. But we know that it will not throw an error if we pass the CMD parameter, right? So that's what we are going to do next. We are going to pass in CMD. And we are going to pass the command which we want to execute on the server. So in this case, it was ID command. So this provides us with the user information with which the Apache server is running, right? So this is a www data user with the user ID of 33. Now, can anyone tell me what would have happened if this is 0? It is every attacker's and hacker's dream to get root on a machine, right? So if this is 0, that means, again, we have gotten to the root privileges onto the server, and this pretty much opens up a whole window of attacks which the attacker can perform. So now it is important to note that most of the time, in case of Apache server, you'll find the UID as 33. This is because by default, Apache server are configured to run with this specific user. And if you want to change that user to a root, we'll have to build Apache from source, right? So this is again for Apache server, it might not be possible to get root directly. So this is again how we can go ahead, execute commands onto the compromised target machine. So who am I is basically checking with whom we are logged in. And next we are going to read the etc password file. So now can anyone tell me, can we read etc shadow file? Yes, that is correct. We cannot read etc shadow file. So we can read etc password file. Now, what all information can etc shadow or etc password provide us with which we can perform other attack? Yes. So one important thing to note here is many people do not realize that etc password file can provide us with user information. So what we can do is go ahead, perform SSH brute forcing dictionary attack on these users and try to maybe compromise their SSH credentials. Now, at this point, we can go ahead, read the source of the application, right? Because again, we have a command shell in here. We can go ahead, read the source of the application. And then from the source, we can identify the database credentials or all of the hard-coded credentials if there are any. And then we can use those credentials to maybe interact with the database service and steal information and whatnot. So how cool was this demo? How to upload a simple shell dot or a PHP shell onto the server using this misconfiguration. So this is just to explain that etc shadow file contains the hashes of the users, and the user information will be present in etc password. But we can also store the user password hash in etc password. It is not a recommended practice, but it is also possible to define the hash in place of X, and that hash will be used for the password. So next, let's go back to slide. Let me quickly close the tabs. Now, WebDAV is it stands for web-based distributed authoring and versioning. It is an extension of HTTP protocol, allows user to edit files on remote web server. Now, the biggest misconfiguration was WebDAV was enabled on the server, and any user can interact with WebDAV. It was not authenticated access, right? It did not have any sort of authenticated access. So these were the HTTP verbs which were supported, which ultimately allowed an user to upload and delete file. Now this is again how to get a shell. Now, when you're talking about authentication in HTTP, there are three primary authentication methods. We have basic authentication, we have digest authentication, and we have token-based authentication. So I hope every one of you would have seen a prompt like this, right? Maybe in universities, maybe in colleges, uh, some directory would be asking for this set of credentials, username and password. So has anyone not seen this prompt? So whenever we are trying to access a protected directory, this prompt will pop up. You can definitely go ahead, try the same. You would have seen similar pop-up in case of routers as well. So now there are two authentication methods. We have basic authentication and we have digest authentication. The biggest disadvantage of basic authentication is the credentials are sent in plain text. So this problem is mitigated in digest authentication. In case of digest authentication, the hash of the username password is sent, and this follows a couple of sequences. It uses nonce and other information to generate this hash. So again, it is not required to go into this much depth in case of digest authentication, but you can read about it. Again, these are the videos. So let me go to Pentest Academy. Let me go to the courses. For some odd reason, I think my entire system is slowing down. So here we have the web application course, which is web application pen testing. So in here, we have covered the digest authentication. We have covered everything in detail. So if you're interested in learning how digest authentication work, what all steps there are, you can go to this course, and here we have HTTP digest authentication. So here we have covered everything in detail, right? The very basics, and uh, I have never seen it explained this well anywhere else. So again, this is the best way to learn digest authentication. So you can take a look at this one. This again, it is not mandatory to learn about this one, because again, we are covering the internal of digest authentication in these videos. But if you're interested, you can take a look at the course videos in here. So in order to have better understanding of some of the core concept, I'll recommend you going through the course, but it is not required as of now. In case if you have some difficulty in the basics, right, understanding the basics, you can go ahead, follow along the course as well. This will provide you insight on a couple of other attacks as well. So in order to claim the certificate, it is not required to go through this course. As long as you're following everything we have covered in the boot camp itself, it will be sufficient for you to gain the certificate. Now the next comes digest, or the token based authentication, right? So how many of you have interacted with APIs? So if you have interacted with the APIs, you'll probably have used API key to interact with the API, right? So in the modern web application, or which is again the single page applications, we rely on APIs a lot. So this is where we are using token based authentication. And we'll also take a look at what all attack we can perform on these APIs later on in the session. So now let's jump into another demo and let's see how to attack a basic authentication HTTP mechanism. Let me quickly bring up another video. So we are going to use a tool called Hydra. So can anyone tell me why it is named Hydra? So people who are aware of Greek mythology would be able to answer this one. So the first stage is again find the IP address of the attacker machine, then identify the IP address of the target machine. So the reason it is called Hydra is like some of you have guessed, it is because Hydra is a tool which uses multiple threads to perform dictionary and brute forcing attacks. So it is analogous to the Hydra, which had multiple heads, right? So that's why the name is kept as Hydra. Now, how many of you have used the tool called Nmap? And is there someone who has not used it? So people who have not used Nmap, this tool is a utility which you can go ahead and use to perform various scan on a target machine. So this is a very simple scan. It performs SYN scan by default. So all we have to do is uh, mention the utility, which is Nmap in this case, followed by the IP address, and then it will identify the ports which are open on the target machine. So in this case, we can notice port 80 is open and port 3306 is open. So next, once we have identified that port 80 is open, by default, web application use the port 80 as well as 443. So we can go ahead, interact with the web server by providing the IP address. So now upon navigating to the IP address, it redirected us to the login.php page. And now there is a directory called /basic. So here we can notice it provided us with a prompt with username and password. So now if we try to enter a valid or a random set of credentials, it provides us with an unauthorized message. So can anyone tell me what is the status code of this specific response? It is not 403, so it is 401, and the same is mentioned in here. So if we'll take a look at in here, 401 unauthorized, right? So whenever we provide an invalid set of credential, it will return us 401 unauthorized. So we'll take a break after this demo, and then we'll continue with the session. So similarly, we have a directory called digest. Now we have identified that there are two directories, /basic and /digest. Again, this information is also provided in the challenge description. So while you're starting a lab, right? So we have the challenge description mentioned in here. So all of those information will be mentioned in here. So the basic/digest information was mentioned in there. So now what we are going to do is we are going to inspect these directories, and we are going to take a look at the headers which are sent when we send a request to these directories. So this is again the head request, and here we can notice it says 401 unauthorized and www authentication basic, right? So this at this point it indicates that this is a basic authentication and the realm is private. So these are again the two important information which we need to note in here. Now similarly for digest, we'll notice that it is digest, the realm is private, and then we have something called nonce, right? Then we have algorithm, and we have QOP. So basically what happens is you can think of this as namespace, right? So there can be multiple namespaces. For example, we can have private, we can have secret, and in this one we can have credentials. For example, let's say ABC is the name, and then we have password 123. So for all of the pages which reside in this specific realm can be accessed with this set of credentials. But let's say we have a page in secret, and this set of credential does not exist in the secret realm. We have DEF and 456. So we cannot use this specific credential for this realm or page which reside inside this realm. So that is the again the notion of realm in here. So these credentials reside in a specific realm, and the pages also reside in that realm. And only those credentials can be used to access those pages. So here we can notice we have a different kind of response, right? We have digest, and it says realm, nonce, algorithm, QOP. So now next what we are going to do is we are going to use Hydra. And Hydra is again one of the most beautiful dictionary attack tool I've seen. So we can go ahead, provide it with a dictionary, and again, it performs all of the attacks beautifully. So we use the -L option to provide the name, right, which is again the login name, and we use the -P option to provide the password. Now, in case if you want to provide it with a word list, we use the capital letters. For example, -L for a list of names, and -P for a list of passwords. So what we are going to do next is, so these are all the options which we have. So we are going to use Hydra. We are going to provide the name admin. So this is again the user whose password we want to crack. So this is again the admin user. We are going to provide the password word list. Now this is a custom created word list by Pentester Academy. So this again, as the name suggests, 100 common passwords are mentioned in there. So we are going to provide that word list to the Hydra. And then we are going to provide the server information, which is 192.195.214.3. And then we tell it to perform HTTP GET. This is the type of authentication. And we provide it with the endpoint /basic. So now it will automatically, again, perform the dictionary attack. And this is how easy it is to perform dictionary attack with Hydra. Whenever we have found an endpoint which is protected with basic or any kind of HTTP authentication, we can use this approach, mention HTTP GET and then the endpoint. Now this identified the uh, password as admin and cookie1. Next, what we are going to do is we are going to perform an attack on digest authentication. But before that, we are going to use the set of credentials, right? So whenever there's a HTTP based authentication, we need to use this specific option of curl -u. This specifies that these are the user credentials. And in this case, it is going to be admin and followed by the password separated with colon. And we are going to interact with this specific endpoint, which is /basic endpoint. Now on the same page, we can go ahead and enter the credentials, and this will provide us with a flag. Now, please note in real world scenario, for example, this is to answer the question of Omer K. In the real world scenario, the endpoint will be login.php. Now, that is not the case. In case of web pages, this will be handled eternally by the web application. So let me explain this part. So this is again a web server, right? On the web server, the application resides. So this is the web app. And here we have all of the login page, login.php. We have dashboard page, which is again home.php and whatnot. So the basic or HTTP authentication resides on this level. So this is again HTTP authentication is here. The login.php, home.php, this logic is controlled by the developer, right? So for example, if we have a login form, it will check the authentication information and then it will return either 200 OK, 302. All of this is done by the developer. But in case of HTTP authentication, this is done by the person who is managing the server. So what we can do is protect a specific directory, for example, in this case, /basic digest, and then enforce that this set of credential has to be used in order to access this directories. So this is again a major difference in this case. HTTP authentication is enforced on the server level, and all of the web application web pages are enforced on the again the above layer, which is again controlled by the developer. So this is to answer the question of falseness. Can we also have authentication on client side as well? So there is no such option. Again, we can go ahead, build it out ourselves with JavaScript, right? So we can have an application which is written and which uses JavaScript, and then we have a client side authentication in there. Apart from this, the client side authentication is the ones which are offered by the web browser. So for example, some web browser and some plugin will force you to enter credential in order to use some of the saved credential. For example, if you're using a password manager, right? So most of them have a login form or a login option, which you will have to provide all of the information, and only then you can use the autofill password. By default, there is no option available, which is again enforces a client side authentication. Now, this is how we can access the basic endpoint, which is protected with basic authentication. Next, what we are going to do is we are going to perform the attack on digest authentication. So this is how easy it is to perform this attack with Hydra. Now, please note, digest authentication is way more complex than basic authentication. In case of basic authentication, what happens is, let's say we have the credential admin password, right? So this set of credentials is base64 encoded, and then it is sent to the server. But in case of digest authentication, a lot of things happen. We get a nonce, and then we generate the hash, we send it to the server. So the process is a lot complex compared to digest authentication. But in case of Hydra, it automatically takes care of all of those operations. And on a user level, as you can notice, we just had to change the name of the endpoint, and it automatically identifies that digest authentication is enforced, and it takes care of everything behind the scenes. And as we can notice, it was able to identify the password. Now, whenever we want to use digest authentication, we need to use this flag minus minus digest and then provide the credentials. Uh, am I still not audible? Hello? Okay, so which part was not completed? So where did it break? Okay, so just to let me go back in here so that everyone is on the same page. So here, so in case of digest authentication, all we have to do is change the endpoint. Now, in case of basic authentication, right? So we have the credentials, admin password in this case. For example, we have admin password. This is converted into base64, right? And then this is sent to the server, which is again, this is the server. Now, in case of digest authentication, we get the nonce and then we perform hashing and all of those operations are performed. And then the hash of the password is sent to the server. So behind the scenes, a lot of complex operations are happening, right? Now, with Hydra, we do not have to worry about all of those operations. We just have to mention the name of the endpoint. And now Hydra will automatically take care of the algorithm, right? It will automatically perform all of the operation for basic authentication as well as digest authentication. So now once we have identified that this is the endpoint which supports digest authentication, we need to pass this specific flag, which is minus minus digest. This is to tell curl that this endpoint uses digest authentication and provide the hashed password. By default, it will use the basic authentication. So that's why we have to pass the minus minus digest. Now, if we'll navigate to the digest endpoint, and if we'll provide the credentials in here, we'll notice that we did not have to perform any other operation, right? It was pretty straightforward, just like basic authentication. So again, the authentication is automatically being handled by the browser in this case. But in case of curl, we have to mention minus minus digest. So this is how you can perform dictionary attack on HTTP based authentication. So this is again the target IP host. This is the service which we want to use, the protected directory. And this was the lab which we just saw. And next we are going to take a look at how to perform the same attack with Burp Suite. So before that, we'll take a 5-minute break and we'll come back. So how is the pace? Are you enjoying the session? Okay, that's great. Is the pace okay for everyone or am I going too fast? Okay, that's great. So we'll take a 5-minute break and we'll come back. Till then, if anyone have questions, please post it on the live instructor interaction channel and I'll answer them. Yes, please don't worry. All of the session recording, the slides, the lab videos, everything will be provided to you after the this session. Welcome back, everyone. Uh, so this is to answer the question of Catalyst. Are you going to be using Burp Community for your demonstration? Yes. For all of the demos, we'll be using the Burp Community Edition, and we'll also take a look at how to use Zap, where you do not have any throttling limitation and all of these. And so this is to answer the question of broken disk. Will this Discord channel be available for duration of the course, even outside the presentation time? Yes. This again, you can go ahead. Feel free to post questions during the week, and I'll answer them within a couple of hours. And this Discord server will be there for a few weeks after the bootcamp as well. And after that, the server will be deleted, but we'll let you know in advance so that you can download all of the resources, and just to make sure that you do not lose on anything. And uh, this is to answer the question of uh, just a second. This is to answer the question of Falsnex. If we get the labs done soon, and if we want to explore more, can we look into the web app course in Pentester Academy? So once you have completed all of the labs, which we have provided in home labs as well as the class labs, you can go ahead, definitely explore this course. Uh, I do not expect all of you to cover this one, because I understand that some of you might not have the time to go through all of this course material as well, right? So it is not mandatory, but if you want to, again, strengthen your fundamentals even more, you can take a look at this course. And you can also go ahead, explore other topics, right? With this subscription, you have been provided access to Pentest Academy as well as Attack Defense. So this is, again, full access to these platforms. So you can explore other topics as well. We have a lot of topics which we have covered on Attack Defense. So again, there are 2,200 uh, 26 labs, and none of the team members have actually solved all of these labs, right? There are so many, it will take a couple of years to solve all of those. Yes, you can go ahead, download the course videos as well, and you can watch them later on. The lab, the Pentest Academy access will be revoked after 5 weeks. So this is, again, 4 weeks of bootcamp access plus one additional week for all of you to solve the labs. So you have a 5-week access. Next, any other question? We'll take a look at a couple of attacks on APIs as well. This is where API gateway comes in, right? We are going to take a look at API gateway attacks, but it will come later on in the session. Just a second, let me close this one. I think my entire browser slowed down for some odd reason. Yes, the timing will be same for all of the bootcamp sessions. Now, let's take a look at how to perform this attack with Burp Suite. So is there someone who has not used Burp Suite before? Burp Suite is, again, if you are performing pen testing, this is a tool you must have used. So please note, the session is, again, going to be every Sunday. So again, the lab access is, again, 7 days a week, right? So you have 5 into 7, which is 35 days of access. So what we are going to do at this point is we are going to look for the open port, and we are going to navigate to the application. And this is the endpoint, basic endpoint, right? So we go ahead, enter the credentials. And how many of you are familiar with the concept of proxy? Anyone? And how many of you are not familiar with the concept of proxy? So just so that everyone is on the same page, let me quickly draw this one out. So here we have the client, right? And here we have the server. So this is client, this is server. So whenever we send a request, this request is sent to the server, and then we get a response. Now, in case of proxy, such as Burp Suite, what we do is we have a middleman in here. So let me erase this one. So we have something called a proxy in here, which is burp, right? So this can be burp suite, this can be zap, and whatnot. So what we do is we configure the browser. So this is again the browser. We configure the browser to send all of the traffic to this proxy. And then this proxy will go ahead, send that traffic to the server. It will get that response. And at this point, we can configure to not intercept the response, and it will be sent directly to the client. And we can also intercept that request in here, right? And at this point, we can tamper it. And similarly, we can tamper the request. For example, if you send username and password from here, we can change that and then send it to the server. This way, it provides us with an opportunity to modify the original request before it is sent to the server. So that's why we use Burp Suite to go ahead, tamper with the request, see how the server behaves, and perform other operations. Yes, so let me go back in here. What we can do is, in case of SSL, what we do is we need to have a certificate installed in here in the browser, which is again, so this way what happens is Burp will create two connection, right? So these are both SSL connection. One SSL connection is in here, one SSL connection is in here. So all of that request is sent to Burp, and then Burp will decrypt the traffic, and then it will send all of the data to the server over another SSL connection. So this is possible as well. So now let's go ahead. Let me quickly show. Yeah, I don't think I have included the installation part. So in case if you're interested in Tube and Pentester Academy, hopefully the video should show up. So we do have a video installation video of how you can go ahead, configure Burp Suite and Foxy Proxy. Let me search for maybe Foxy Proxy. Foxy Proxy is a plugin with which, yeah, I'll post the link later on. So it's available on Pentest Academy TV, or official YouTube channel. So let's go back to the video. So now, in order to configure the browser to use that proxy, we can either do that manually, which is again going to the settings section into the network setting and then configuring the proxy, or we can go ahead use the Foxy Proxy plugin. So this is again the Foxy Proxy plugin. So this is how easy it is to use. We can go ahead, configure the proxy information in here, and then select the Burp Suite option in here. So inside the lab exercise, so in the lab, when you'll try this one, when you try this lab, it automatically has that Foxy Proxy and everything installed. So you don't have to do anything. You just have to select the Burp Suite option in here. So this is not the video. There's another video which demonstrates installation of Burp Suite and Foxy Proxy, and it is available on the YouTube channel. I'll provide that link later on. So if you want to explore Burp Suite on your own and configure it on your local machine, you can follow that video. So next, what we are going to do is we are going to start a Burp Suite. And this is again pretty straightforward interface. So thanks for posting the video. You saved me a little work. So now, once we configure Foxy Proxy and Burp Suite, whenever we send a request from the browser, it will be intercepted by Burp Suite. So let me quickly full screen this one so that it's clear. So now what we are doing is we are entering a set of credentials and we are clicking on OK. And I think I'll increase the font size. Let me see. No, I've not increased the font size. So this font is again a little tiny, but anyways. So here we have the authorization header, right? And then we have something called basic, and then we have a value in here. So this value, can anyone tell me what kind of value is this? So whenever we have an equal to, we can infer that this is probably base 64, right? So base 64 encoding uses A to Z, all from small caps to large caps. So we have again 52 characters in here. Then we have the 9 or the 10 digit 0 to 9, and which is again 10. Then we have the two characters which are plus and slash, right? So we have A to Z, we have small a to small z, and then we have 0 to 9, and then we have plus and slash. So this forms the base 64 character set. So whenever the characters are in this range, we can identify that this string is probably base 64 encoded string. So now once we have identified that this is base 64, we can go ahead decode it to find the content. And equal to is for padding, right? So again, base 64 encoding is off topic, but whenever you have an equal to, it is a clear giveaway that it might be base 64 encoded string. Equal to is used for padding. So now what we are going to do is we are going to use the feature called intruder. So in case of intruder, what we can do is we can send various requests, or we can perform dictionary attack using intruder. So here, what we did, let me go back in here so that everyone is on the same page. We right clicked on the interface, we send the request to the intruder, and here we have a positions tab, right? And now in the positions tab, if you'll notice, we have a color difference in here, right? This part. And here it has two symbols, which is again somewhat similar to dollar, right? So inside that we have a zero value mentioned in here. So this is a marker which is automatically added by Burp Suite for the request. Now what we have to do is, first of all, we are going to clear the marker. And now what we are going to do is we are going to base 64 decode this value. So at this point, we cannot confirm that this is base 64 without actually decoding it, right? So we are going to base 64 decode just to make sure that it is actually a base 64 value. And here we can notice this was the credentials which we passed in. So in case of basic authentication, the credentials are always passed like this: username, password. These are separated by colon, and then this value is base 64 decoded, or sorry, base 64 encoded. So now when we have to perform a dictionary attack on this specific endpoint, so in this case, again, let me go back to the character string. The equal to sign is a giveaway, right? We have the equal to symbol in here. And the character set, if you'll notice, it is all between A to Z, capital A to Z, 0 to 9, and plus minus, right? It follows all of these rules, which is again, the characters belong in this range. Then we have equal to. Equal to is used for padding in case of base 64. So that's why we went ahead, tried to perform base 64 decode, and it provided us with the base 64 decoded string. Now, what we have to do at this point is, in order to perform a dictionary attack, we need to substitute this string, and we need to convert that string into base 64 encoded value. So what we are going to do is we are going to select this string, and then, or we are going to select a simple string, and then we are going to add the marker, right? So we have added the marker. Now Burp Suite knows that this part is the one which has to be substituted. So here we have selected the attack type as sniper. This is again because you only have one field to change, so that's why it is set to sniper. Yes, that is correct. We can also send the request to decoder and perform various kind of decoding. We'll take a look at decoder later on in the session. So now what we are going to do is we are going to navigate to the payload section. Now this is the payload set, right? So this was the marked payload. So we are going to select payload set from 1 here, and we are going to select the payload type as simple list. And now we are going to add, or we are going to load the word list. This is again the 100 common word list. Now we have the set of words in here, right? So this is again the word which is going to be replaced at that marked place. Now we know that there has to be a couple of operations which are to be performed onto these words, right? So the first operation is we need to add a prefix, which is again admin colon. We need to add this specific string to the words. And then, so I'll indicate this as word. And then we need to base 64 encode this. And then it has to be substituted at the marked place. So we are going to add the prefix, or we are going to select the payload processing and add a rule in here which says add prefix admin colon. We are going to click on OK, and this has added the rule. Next, we are going to add another rule, that is encode this in base 64, and we are going to click OK. Now what happens is burp will iterate over this list and take each of these words, append, or sorry, add a prefix called admin colon to all of these words, and then generate the base 64 value. Now this base 64 value is then substituted at the marked place. Now please note, all of these are free tools, free and open source tool. This is community edition, and will also show you how to perform the substitute operation with Zap, which is again an open source tool and does not have any throttling limit as Burp Suite. So now at this point, what we have done is we have added the prefix rule and we have added the base 64 encode rule. So now we are going to click on start attack to perform the attack. Now, as we can notice, again, we have gotten some result, right? So let me go back in here. So when you are performing attack using the community edition, again, this is the limitation of Burp Suite. It throttles the request. So as you're sending out requests, the request will slowly slow down. So for example, in the first minute, it can go ahead, send out like 15 requests in a minute, but later on you will notice it is sending less than one request in a minute. So this is the issue of community edition. So you can either go for pro edition or you can use Zap proxy. So we'll cover how to use Zap proxy later on in the session. So upon sending the request, again, so I had cropped the video, so that's why you you suddenly saw the jump from 7 to 64. So now what we are doing is for every request, we get the status code, right? So we are going to check for a status code which is not equal to 401. So this again, we can go ahead apply a sorting on this specific column. So let me quickly click on play. So here we can notice the status code was 200, right? So we simply scroll to find the status code of 200. Now in this one, what we can do is go ahead, navigate to the response section here, and this is again the payload which we have in here. So now what we're going to do is we are going to send this payload to decoder. Now, can anyone tell me what is the type of decoding in this case? Yes, we'll take a look at the sorting in case of other demos. So percentage 3D, right? So this is not base 64 encoding. Yes, that is correct. This is URL encoding, right? And this is URL encoding for equal to. So the first thing which we have to do is decode this as URL. So you're going to perform URL decode, and we'll notice now we have a base 64 encoded string. And we can go ahead decode the base 64 encoded value. So there we go. Now this is the correct set of credentials. Now this is how you can go ahead use Burp Suite to perform basic or attack on basic authentication endpoint. So in case of exam, we have not, we have not included dictionary based attack, or in case if we have included it, we will be providing the exact dictionary to use, right? You won't have to use RockU and all of these large dictionaries, because again, it can take up significant amount of time, right? So in case if there is a dictionary attack, we'll be mentioning what dictionary to use. But in the first version of the exam, we have not used or we have not uh, requested the attendees to perform any kind of dictionary attack. Now, in case of Burp Suite, we have GUI interface. Intruder can be used to perform dictionary attack. It provides or it supports the multi-level payload encoding, right? It is a beautiful feature of Burp Suite. Now, one of the biggest disadvantages is the request will be time throttled, and due to this, the attacks can take hours to complete. Now, this was how we can go ahead, mark the uh, various parameters and form fields to perform attack. So now we simply looked at the response code. So at this point, we can click on here, right? We can click on the column header and we can also perform sorting to get this result first or last. Now this was how to attack HTTP login form with Burp Suite. Now next we are going to take a look at HTTP login form with Zap Proxy. So now unlike Burp Suite, Zap Proxy is an open source tool which is again managed by OWASP themselves, and it has a lot of features. And yeah, it's a really beautiful piece of tool. So first of all, again, the process is the same. We are going to identify the target IP address. So let me quickly forward this one. So this is the application. Now what you're going to do is, oh, just a second, this is the same video. Let me go to another one. Just a minute, I think. Okay, so this was not actually, this was the basic authentication one. I skipped this one. So this is attack on HTTP login form. So let me quickly bring up that one. So right, so now we know that, yeah, actually we do not want to waste time on typos, right? So in the previous training, we were actually performing live demos, and due to which, again, there was many typos, which ultimately consumed a lot of time. So that's why we are taking the video-based approach. So it's very easy to explain, and I don't have to worry about typos anymore. So now we are configuring Burp Suite to act as a proxy, and we are going to pass in the credentials. So this is the request which we have. So we are going to send this request to intruder, and then now we have two positions which we need to change. One is the login and one is the password, right? These are the value which we want to perform dictionary attack on. So we are going to clear the markers, and then we are going to add a marker for the values which are to be substituted. So here we have John and password as Doe. So all of these will be marked. Now, this is where we have to perform or we have to substitute multiple values, right? So that's why we are going to use cluster bomb. So this is again the attack type. In case of single payload, we can go ahead use sniper. In case of multiple, we are using cluster bomb. And now we can go ahead select which parameter we want to substitute. So the first parameter, it is the username, right? So we are going to add a couple of username information in here. So this is going to be admin, and it's going to be B. And then for the second one, we are going to add a couple of passwords, admin, password, admin password, bug, and we'll also load uh, words from the word list. Okay, so we are not loading the words from the word list. Now we are going to start the attack, and this is again the error message we get, and we are going to click on OK. And now we are going to perform attack on HTTP login form. And here we can notice the B bug. It had the status code as 302. So this was a clear giveaway, right? And that's why we got the 502 difference in length as well. So all of these failed attempts, right? All of them have similar length. So this is again another giveaway, which represents that some different kind of response is returned in this case because the difference is very much significant. Yes, there are many operations which you can perform. You can also perform grep operation, but these are again some of the advanced feature. I do not want to include those in the first session itself, right? So we'll take a look at that in later on, in later sessions. So this is how we can go ahead use. Uh, okay, I think I have covered the grep one. Yeah, I have covered the grep one in here. So we can go ahead add a regex to check for a specific string. So in this case, what we are doing is we are checking if this specific string is present in the response, and we simply go ahead, click on add. And now when we'll start the attack, we'll have one more column. So here we can notice we have this specific column, right? So this is again the string. If it exists, it will have the tick box, otherwise it won't have tick box. So this is how we can use the grep feature as well. There are a couple of more feature in Burp Suite, and we'll cover those in later session. For example, we have sequencer, repeater, all of those will be covered in the later session. So next, we are going to take a look at how to perform a login or a dictionary attack with Zap proxy. Okay, so I think this video played behind the scenes. So first things first, we have to identify the IP address, and then we are going to start up the Zap proxy tool. So this is provided by OWASP. This does not have any limitation for throttling. So if you do not have the pro, or if you cannot go for the pro edition of Burp Suite, this is the tool which I'll recommend you to use. This has a lot of features, and many of the pen tester might not be even aware of the full power of Zap proxy. This is a very powerful tool. Now, this provides us a feature called manual explore. We can go ahead, enter the URL in here and click on launch browser. So, and that browser will be automatically configured to use Zap as proxy. So in the previous demo, we saw Burp Suite as proxy, right? So in this case, it is Zap as proxy. So this is again the hood, which is again the display which appears just above the interface. So we can go ahead, disable or enable this hood. It provides us with a couple of features. Personally, I do not use the hood because again, it somewhat distorts the web application features. So now what we are going to do is, at this point, please note, this is the client, right? This is the browser. And this is Zap. Or sorry, this is the server, and this is Zap. So all of the traffic, all of the activity which we do in here is actually sent to Zap, and then it is sent to the server, and then we get the response from back in here, right? So at this point, Zap itself is the proxy, and by default, Zap also uses port 8080. So all of the traffic is sent to port 8080. So in case if you're not using the manual explore option in Zap, then you can go ahead, configure the proxy similar to that of Burp Suite, which is you'll configure 127.0.0.1 colon 8080, and it will redirect or it will send the traffic to Zap tool itself. So now we are going to send the login credentials. And at this point, we can notice that there is no interception which is happening, right? So, but in case of Zap, what happens is it automatically records all of this activity. There are a couple of features which are different in Zap as well as in Burp Suite, and there are a lot of them. So in this case, I'm going to show you the, again, feature which are there, which are common in case of Burp Suite as well as Zap, and how we can use Zap to avoid the throttling issue. So the major difference in case of Zap is there is no throttling limitation. For example, you can send thousands of requests within a minute, right? But in case of Burp, we cannot do that. So now at this point, we can notice we have a login form in here, right? So all of the requests are actually logged by Zap, and all of them appear in here. So this is again the parent, and then we have all of the resources which are accessed. There is a fonts directory, there is an image directory, JS directory, And these are the web pages. We have login.php, and a post request was sent to this specific endpoint, right? So next, what we are going to do is we are going to click on this specific request, and we'll notice if you have used Burp Suite's repeater section, right? So this is pretty much similar to that one. So we have a request tab, we have a response tab. So here we can go ahead, customize the request, send it, and get back the response. So now please note this is an open source tool, and Burp, again, the Pro Edition is a paid tool, right? So they have a team which is managing those tools uh, full time. And due to the same reason, you'll find that the interface of Zap Proxy and the UI might not be as fluent as that is in case of Burp Suite. So for example, when I was trying to right click on this one, the layout or the menu actually dropped right in here, right? Whereas it was supposed to appear at this specific section. So there are a couple of visual bugs, but I can assure you that Zap is a very, very powerful tool, which again has a lot of features. So next, what we are going to do is we are going to use the fuzzer option of Zap. So we're going to navigate to attack and click on fuzz. Now we have to select or add the marker just like we did in case of repeat or the Burp Suite intruder. So we are going to select the John field. We are going to click on add, and then we are going to add the strings. So these are the strings which we need to iterate over in case of this specific parameter. Now similarly for do, we are going to select it, click on add, and then we are going to click on add again. And here we can go ahead and add the strings. And similarly, we can also load word list in here. So these are all the strings which we can go ahead and add. And we are going to click on add, click on OK, and we can go ahead start the fuzzer. So I have not demonstrated in this case. I'll take it up in later session. There's an option to load a word list in case of Zap. So next, oh, just a second. So once we start the attack, now please note there is no additional pop-up which happens, right? So once we click OK, once we start the fuzzer, there is no additional pop-up window which appears. All of the results are actually stored at this point. So this contains all of the result. And here we can notice a lot of request has been sent, and we have a 302 response status code, and the size is 0 bytes, and the header size is 538 bytes, right? So based on this information, we have identified that this is the endpoint, or these are the correct request. So what we can do is go ahead, click on the request, and this request will open up in this section. So let me go back in here. So here we can notice we have bbuck credential, right? So these were the payload which were used. So we have that information mentioned in here. So we can go ahead, use those credentials to log into the application. So can you please elaborate on this one? I'm not able to understand the question. What's reflected there? So when you'll click on the request, again, that request is also in here, right? So this is how you can use Zap to perform this attack. Now, please don't worry. Later on in the session, we'll take a look at some of complex attacks with Zap as well as Burp Suite. So we'll take a look at a couple of advanced dictionary attack, which we can, and a couple of options which we can go ahead and use in case of Zap. Now, when we'll talk about web application, that the common model which we follow is the MVC model. We have the model, we have the view, and we have the controller, right? So model is basically the data. So all of the data is represented by model. Then view is the one which is rendered to the user. And now controller is responsible for, again, processing all of this data and generating this view. And this view is ultimately provided to the user, and that is visible onto the browser. Now, in the recent times, developers have again shifted from writing out their own code into using web frameworks. And web frameworks is again used primarily for rapid development, and it it is said that whenever you're using web framework, the security is relatively better for people who are not aware of, again, security, uh, or are not aware of secure coding, right? So for example, web framework automatically takes care of multiple database transactions and all of these things, right, which otherwise would cause an issue when developers are building out entire applications themselves. And this, in a way, reduces developers' headache because you do not have to worry about most of the, again, basic implementations. It is all taken care by web framework. Now the question arises, okay, if we are, or if the developers are using web framework, let me quickly exit the full screen. If developers are using web framework, why is there still misconfiguration and vulnerabilities, right? So if, again, if people are using web framework, why is there misconfiguration and vulnerabilities? Anyone? So now in case of web frameworks, what happens is, again, uh, web frameworks also have vulnerability, right? So let's say we have a web framework which the developers have used. And let's say the version of this web framework is version 1, right? And they used this to deploy an application. Now, later on, as the time goes by, we have version 2, we have version 3. And now let's say a vulnerability is identified when the web framework version is version maybe 5, right? So let's say we have version 5 in here, and a vulnerability was identified when the version 5 was released. Now, what happens is the vulnerability is patched in this version, right? So we release another version called version 6 or version 5 patched, right? These versions are the new versions, and this does not have the vulnerability which was present in version 1, which was again the older version, right? Now, one of the issues is over this time, V1, V2, V3, V5, V6, there has been a lot of changes, right? And now this application is actually dependent on version 1. So migrating this application to use the version 6, this might include a lot of changes. So many times what happens is these web frameworks, also, although they are recommended by the community itself, web application developer, they do not migrate their application to the latest patched version, due to which these applications are again vulnerable, and this is where attackers can go ahead, exploit all of these applications, right? So this is again a major issue which happens in case of web frameworks. There are changes, and due to the migration cost, right? Whenever we are migrating something, we have to make sure everything works. And when we have thousands of lines of code, it is again the process of migration is a little painful. So that's where whenever there's a significant web framework vulnerability which is detected, for example, if you'll hear about Ruby on Rails, right? Whenever you are hearing a vulnerability of WordPress, Drupal, all of these are very popular names. And whenever there's a misconfiguration and vulnerability detected in here, most of the developers who are using these framework will panic, and they will definitely go and check whether it is, or if their application is vulnerable or not. So now the biggest issue with web framework, let me quickly delete this one, is the performance might suffer as the code might not be optimized for the task. A bug in the core framework can make all of the application based on the framework vulnerable. So these are the popular frameworks which we have: Spring, Hibernate, Struts, JSFG, GWT. We have Django, Flask, Tornado, Web 2Py. For Node.js, we have Express.js, Sales.js. PHP, we have Laravel, Symfony. For Ruby, we have Ruby on Rails. And Ruby on Rails is one of the most affected web framework I have heard about. There have been multiple remote code execution vulnerability due to which again it created a lot of panic within the web development community. So over the years, in case of Django, we'll notice that these were the web application vulnerability trends, right? So these are the ones which were there in 2018 and 2019. And if you notice, this number is not reducing to zero, right? So over the years, what is happening is as new features and new, again, support of various components are added, vulnerability is also introduced. So that's why we have an increase in number. Similarly, in case of the type of vulnerabilities, there are denial of service and XSS attacks. Now, if we'll take a look at Ruby on Rails, this is where it becomes very, very critical. We have 13 remote code execution vulnerability which have been found, right? This is the most severe vulnerability which can have on a machine, right? So this is where, again, whenever there's a usage of framework, what goes wrong, right? Now, how many of you are familiar with the concept of single page applications? So in case of single page application, before single page application, let's talk about normal pages, right? So whenever we are sending a request, for example, when you go to google.com, this page completely loads, right? So this is again a simple example. When we send a request, we get a response. In case of single page application, the redirection does not happen. So let me give you the example of Pentest Academy. So as you can notice, whenever I'm clicking on a specific tab, the entire page is loading, right? We have a loading bar which appears in here, which appears in the top in here, right? And if I'll click on any of the section, the entire page loads. But in case of single page application, what happens is this page loads only once. Entire page loads only once. And whenever we are clicking on any of the button, an AJAX request is sent to get the data. And now that data is processed on the client itself to change the view of the web page. Now, the approach which we take in case of single page application is pretty much similar to traditional application. But the difference is we have to intercept each and every request, right? Whatever request is sent to the server, we have to intercept it and then tamper with it. Now, the advantages are, again, it is fast and responsive, caching capability, debugging with Chrome. Disadvantages are SEO optimization. Browser history only marks on one page, right? Because again, if the application is completely based on one page, browser history will only be able to mark the single URL and it won't mark all of the views which are rendered. Now, there are major security issues because everything is based on APIs, right? So now the access control has to be defined on these APIs, as well as we also have to make sure that these access controls are well defined on the client end as well. Now, the example of single page application frameworks are Vue.js, AngularJS, Ember.js. Now, there used to be a time when we had all of the web application components, right? We are talking about Apache server, MySQL server, everything used to reside on the same box. So for example, in older times, we had Apache server, we have MySQL, all of them were on the same box. Now, this created a lot of problem. For example, if something has to change on Apache server, we have to upgrade the entire box, right? For example, if we want to change a version of MySQL, we have to change the entire, or we have to update the server, right? And this could include a update for Apache itself. So we, as you can notice, it creates a lot of management headache. So one of the biggest issues, again, it is difficult to scale. And if something had to change on the database end, we'll also have to, again, update the entire server, which might include updation on the server level as well. Now, in case of microservices, things changed a lot, right? This is where the components got separated. So for example, now Apache server is no longer running on the same machine on which MySQL server is running. So in case of microservices, we have separate components. For example, Apache PHP are running on one container. MySQL will be running on another container. Now, based on the load, what we can do is we can scale, right? We can have multiple of these Apache containers. For example, we can have 2, we can have 3, and whatnot. Similarly, we can scale the databases as well. Now, if something goes wrong with the database server, right, we can terminate this container and then we can start up a new one. This is how easy it has become, but it won't be the same, won't be possible in case of monolithic architecture. So that's why over the years we have shifted towards microservices, and because again it's loosely coupled and it is highly maintainable, and we can go ahead, test it out, perform independent deployment and whatnot. Now, when we are talking about serverless architecture, this is where, again, most of the recent applications are being deployed. So let me go to the next one. Now, before we take a look at serverless architecture, let's talk about traditional architecture, right? So now let's say a developer has written out a secure application, right? So this is again a web application which is running on the server. Now at this point, whenever we are managing a traditional architecture, whenever we are managing all of these servers, we have to make sure that these servers are physically protected. So again, this is where physical security comes in. These servers have to be protected or have to be secure on software level, and these servers have to be secure on operating system level, right? Because if there is any such flaw in any of these, so for example, if you have created a data center, if an attacker is able to walk into the data center, inject his malicious pen drive into the server, it is pretty much, it is possibly the worst scenario we can have, right? So this should not happen. So this is where we have physical security, software level security, operating system level security, all need to be enforced on these servers, and we have to maintain them 24/7, right? Now, apart from this security based, again, maintenance, we also have the cooling based maintenance and internet bill. All of these things have to be maintained, right? And one of the biggest problem is the scaling. OL. So I've written all of these in short form. So this is again physical security, software level security, operating system level security. So these are again the short form. I did not want to spend too much time writing the entire string. So now one of the biggest problem is the scaling, right? As the load on these server increases, we have to add new server. Similarly, for databases, we'll have to perform scaling as well. So as we can imagine, uh, so how does it affect? So for example, let's say the web application is secure, right? And the uh, software level security is also there. But if the server itself is vulnerable, then the attacker can perform OS level or operating system specific exploits on the server to compromise the server. So at this point, it won't be the fault of the developer, because the management of operating system was something which is taken care by system administrator, right? So that's why all of these are very, very important. The web application has to be secure and the server has to be secure. Now, as you can imagine, the management headache itself is pretty huge, right? So this is where serverless comes into the picture. So serverless, again, as the name suggests, it does not represent that there is no server. It's just the fact that we do not have to manage the server. We only have to write out the code, and we only have to write out the code, and this code is responsible for processing the request and returning the response. Now this code is deployed on a container on one of the Amazon server. So now we do not have to manage any kind of servers. We just have to focus on the code. So what happens is when a request is sent, the Lambda function is triggered, which in turn, what happens is it spins up a container or on Amazon server, and this code is again downloaded on this container and it is executed on that container. Now, since this is managed by AWS, these servers are again secure physically. These are secure on software level as well as secure on operating system level. So now the beauty about this infrastructure is that it is highly scalable, and we only have to pay for the amount of time taken by the code to complete its execution, and based on the memory consumed. And it also supports features such as throttling. So now let me quickly take you to the AWS dashboard. So how many of you have created Lambda function before? Anyone? Okay, so again, most of the web application which are being created in recent times, they are using the serverless architecture, right? So for the same reason, in this course, we'll take a look at serverless attacks on cloud native application as well as attacks on traditional application. So what I'm going to do is show you how easy it is to go ahead, create a Lambda function and basically a serverless function. So again, this is AWS dashboard. So let me quickly go back in here. So this is the AWS dashboard. I'm going to navigate to the Lambda service. We can navigate to the same by searching the Lambda service in here as well. And this will take us to the Lambda dashboard. I'm going to close this one and we're going to click on create function. Now we have four options. We can author from scratch, use a blueprint, container image, or use an application from the online serverless app repository. But we are going to create a function from scratch. So now the requirement is that we need to provide the name. So I'm going to name this as web app batch 3. And now we need to select a runtime. Now, please note the server is managed by AWS themselves, right? All of this management headache is taken care by AWS, but this comes with a limitation. The limitation is we have to use either one of their supported runtime or we have to create our own custom runtime. Again, so if our runtime is not available to us, we can go ahead create a custom runtime by following the procedure which AWS has provided. So most of the popular runtimes are again included in here. As we can notice, we have .NET, Go, Java, Node.js, Python, Ruby, and these are the other supported runtime. So I'm going to select Python 3.8. Now this is how easy it is to create a Lambda function, the name as well as the runtime. I'm going to click on create function, and then it's going to take a couple of seconds and the function will be ready. And there we go. So now let me go in here. This is the code, right? So whenever we are developing an application in here, all we need to do is write out the code. We do not have to manage the server at all. So let me change this to hello from PA bootcamps. And I'm going to click on deploy. And I'm going to click on test. So now the function has been deployed. Now I'm going to run the function. I'm going to create a test event. This is again a dummy event with this values. Now we need to set this value because we are passing that value in here, right? So these are again the function definition, event and context. Whatever value we store in the event object, it is passed in here. So when I'll click on test, now there we go. So it returns hello from PA bootcamps. So this is how easy it is to create a Lambda function. All we need to do is write out the code. And if you'll notice, this says duration 1.6 millisecond, build duration is 2 millisecond, memory size is 128 MB. So if I'll search for Lambda pricing, we'll notice we'll have to wait for a couple of seconds. We'll notice this is the price per millisecond. And for 128 MB, this is the price. So this is very, very cheap compared to running a traditional server for 24/7. So now this is how we can go ahead, execute or run a Lambda function manually. Now let's say we want to associate this with a URL. So what we are going to do is click on add trigger, select API gateway, and I'm going to click on this one, create an API. I'm going to select, in this case, let's use the HTTP API itself. For security, I'm going to select open. So just to reiterate, I selected the trigger as API gateway, selected create an API, selected HTTP API, and security set to open. Next, I'm going to click on add. Now the API has been configured and we have the details mentioned in here. Now if we click on this specific link, and it says hello from PA bootcamps. So this is how easy it is to tie an API gateway with a Lambda function. So whatever code we write out now, so for example, let me change this to hello from PA bootcamps batch 3 and click on deploy. We can go ahead change this one, and if I'll execute this one, this says hello from PA bootcamps batch 3. And we only have to pay for the amount of time the Lambda function runs. So this mitigates all of those misconfiguration, right? Operating system level misconfiguration, vulnerabilities, software level vulnerabilities. But as you can imagine, this makes a lot of things easier for the developers. All we need to do is write code now, right? So this was, again, the serverless architecture. Now, the beauty about serverless is, for example, if multiple invocation happen at the same time, right? So for example, what happens is when this function is executed, or when we trigger a Lambda function for the first time, a container is brought up, and then the response is sent back to the user. Now, this container remains active for some duration. And if we get another request, that same container is reused. Now the question arises, what if multiple requests are sent on the same time? So in that case, what happens is multiple Lambda functions are invoked. So on the Amazon server, these containers will brought up for each request, and that container is responsible for sending out the response for the request. So this way, Lambda function provides us with a highly scalable infrastructure. We do not have to worry about scalability at this point. It is automatically managed by Lambda. So this is again why serverless is trending so much. So this wraps up the traditional and the web frameworks as well as the serverless architecture. In the next session, we are going to take a look at attacks on these, again, cloud native application as well as on traditional application. So in case of a single page application, we are going to take a look at a couple of examples, but we are not going to cover the best practices. And let me go to the attack defense side. We are not going to cover the best practices. So let me quickly take you to the attack defense section. So we do have single page applications in here. So let me scroll down in here. So the single page applications are available in here. So in case if you're interested in various kind of single page application attacks, you can take a look at the other topics and navigate to WASP top 10 single page application in here. For this week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to post the recommended lab in the week 1 channel under the sessions category. So if you'll notice, we have week 1 channel. So I'll post all of the recommended lab in here. For this entire course, we are going to cover the labs in this specific section, which is again the web application pen testing basic, this section, right? So we'll take a look at some of the labs from this section, as well as we'll take a look at cloud native applications. And please don't worry, all of the links and everything will be provided on the slide, as well as I'll be posting those information in the week 1 channel as well. So how was the session? Did you enjoy it? Okay, that's great. So in this session, we were covering the basics. In the upcoming session, it's going to be very more interesting because we'll take a look at how to perform attacks on cloud native application and traditional applications as well. So thanks again, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this session. And if you enjoyed, you can go ahead, tweet it out at, so this is the company's Twitter handle, @SecurityTube. This is my personal Twitter handle. It will help us in, again, spreading the word and teaching web application basics to other people as well. So thanks again, everyone. We'll see you next week, next Sunday at the same time. And till then, take care. Bye-bye.